Many people thought this would be a cold day in hell. Maybe even I did too. I finally got rid of the analog console, and it was a pretty big move. A lot of decisions that went into that, probably a year of planning to make the big shift. And people from all around the world keep writing me saying, why did I get rid of it? What did I replace it with? What's the new workflow? So rather than writing out hours and hours and hours of emails, Diego and I thought, why don't we just make this video, kind of turn people on to the big changes we've made, because it's been a pretty dramatic shift in the studio, in the workflow, and we managed to do some pretty interesting things with it. So the console is gone, and admittedly, that kind of bummed me out a little bit. Made me happy that it has a new good home, somebody who really loves it up in Oregon. But the thing is, I just love working on analog consoles. I love the feel of it. I love the speed of it. I just love the way my elbows feel up there on the pads. And and there's certain kinds of records that are easier to do for me on an analog console. So it's a big thing to kind of get rid of it. Was I worried about the professional aspect? Not at all. I did my first in-the-box mix in 1993, so I know how to do it well. I've been doing it for a long, long time. I can do it well. All of my mixes have no compromises at all for my clients. Things are a little bit different and the workflow is different. But since we were gonna get rid of the console, it's a really big shift. Diego and I decided to take the opportunity to really think through the work we do here at the studio, what our clients need, and how we can really best address all the work we actually really do. But I gotta say one thing first. People say, well, why did you get rid of the console? If you enjoy the workflow, enjoy the experience, one word, recall. And virtually everybody, almost every engineer you talk to who has gotten rid of their analog console will almost honestly say it was an issue of recall. Because the reality is, when I first started getting into this, even like 15 years ago, the amount of times you'd finish a mix and then the artist, the label would come back and say, oh yeah, can you change this, change this, change this? Maybe 1 out of every 20, maybe 1 out of 10, but it was a pretty rare thing. You kind of finished the mix, everybody okayed it, and you moved on to the next thing, and it was done. But times have just changed so dramatically, and almost everybody asks for recalls. And in the reality, the analog console and dealing with instant recall, it really just wasn't possible. It was sort of a matter of continue to do this professionally, or have an analog console, or do what a lot of people do and have the giant analog console that really is just a monitor controller and is there for looks. And I'm not going to BS and do that, because if you're not going to have the fun and the workflow of the analog console, it's best to just get them the heck out, except for the photos. They look awesome in the photos. But we decided we're getting rid of the console. What can we do? Well, working through it, we've been able to do some really cool things. The first thing is, when you don't have the console, you can actually just start looking at where you set up your speakers, where you set up your listening environment, specifically on what sounds best in the room. So it bought us a whole lot more flexibility, and for us, flexibility is really, really important, because even sometimes within a day, we switch over from working on mixing projects, to working on mastering projects, to working on tracking projects, and with Recording Bootcamp, to teaching workshops with students in the room. So what we thought through and came up with is kind of a modular system that once we got into it, we're absolutely loving. So let me just kind of give you a quick run through of what we did and why. So the main questions I keep getting over and over and over again is, so you got rid of the console, what did you replace it with? Did you get a control surface? Do you have a summing box? And well, the answer is actually pretty cool, and we're trying to keep it as straightforward as possible. Really, the heart of the monitoring and all of that now is the Cranesong Avocet 2, which is very, very cool. And we looked around at a lot of options, and that couldn't really have served us any better. So basically, the Avocet is our monitor control, but allows us to switch between multiple speakers, allows us to go through a huge array of inputs, both analog and digital, as well as some very cool mono and summing options. So this box is really, really deep and really addressed almost every issue that we would actually have with, level control, speaker switching, monitor control. So it's actually been really good. And the bonus of it is that Cranesong, and especially this new generation, the digital to analog converters are just off the chart good. So it actually even replaced some of my older converters, allowing to have really detailed monitoring for mixing and mastering. So that was a huge bonus. And also the other bonus, which I'll show you in a minute, is this is remote. No audio is actually passing through the box here. And that really has helped a ton with our new kind of hybrid, what we're calling our modular setup. And I'll show you what that does in just a minute. Do I have a summing box? No. I really considered it. I was kind of excited about summing box, not so much that I find that analog summing versus digital summing to be so radically different, but having a summing box would allow me to do some really cool, interesting routing for integrating some of my favorite hardware across buses and things like that. But the reality is the reason we dumped the analog console is for recall. And, so if I had something where I had different analog gear set up as part of a chain, it would make future recall difficult. So if, some settings got changed on the gear, or I sold off a piece of gear, replaced it with something else, or upgraded. So really, if this is all about recall, it's going to be all about recall. So instead of having that, the way we integrate analog gear, which we do a lot of, is it all comes up. I've got some 16 channels of custom Apogee converters. And so we can just route in and we print stuff back into Pro Tools. So we'll do all the analog tone tweaks we want, print things back into Pro Tools. And then if a client needs something recalled next week or 4 months from now, we can just open it up, make the changes, and send it off. And we also have a lot of our sort of outboard digital stuff, like our Lexicon reverbs, old Eventide H3000s, TC2290s, as well as some of the custom analog stuff like the Spring Reverb. That actually comes up on their own analog loops, so I can actually pull those up in Pro Tools with an insert just like Pro Tools. Of course, I have to print that back to track when I'm done with the mix, but it's real easy for me to pull up a Spring Reverb or a real vintage Eventide H3000 right up as if I was pulling in a plugin. Of course, I've got to go over to the wall there to control it, but that's not a big deal at all. As far as a control surface goes, we don't have one. I've got a mouse, I've got a keyboard. I've looked at some different controller options, but really the ones that would start to replace much of the workflow of the analog console, man, you're talking $10, $20, $30, $40,000, and that just kind of doesn't make sense. Honestly, we keep kind of looking around at that Slate Raven, their smaller one, but I still haven't figured out whether that's actually a really cool tool or maybe might be gimmicky. So I'm doing some research into that. We just really do all of our mixing here with keyboard and mouse, and we're also just for fun kind of creative things. We've got a couple cool things from Keith McMillan Instruments here as controllers, for some of the more beat-based stuff here, and actually for simple kind of melodic stuff, we've got that right here. Very small keyboard, so it's kind of a little wacky to play piano on, but when we need to do more involved stuff, we've got the Moog Little Fatty in the back of the room that we can pull up, and we actually have a full-size digital keyboard over in the B room that we can pull over for that. So again, that's a little outside of mixing, just more creative stuff, but these are the toys we have. So I keep talking about this sort of hybrid modular setup, and what the heck do I mean by modular setup? Because really all studios are modular. You sort of plug things in and move them around. But what we needed to address here with what we do in particular is we do a ton of stuff here. We do a lot of mastering. We do a lot of mixing. We also do a lot of tracking sessions. And this is also home base for recording boot camp in Los Angeles. So we actually teach workshops out of this. So this room actually needed to serve a whole bunch of different functions. One of the first things we did for the big makeover was actually tear out the vocal booth in the back of the room. We never used it because, as some of you know, I think vocal booths, small ones, really suck. But also, it actually gave us probably another 5 feet or getting close to 2 meters in the back there. And the longer the room, one, it's going to be more comfortable for students and clients, but more importantly, longer rooms tend to have less severe bass problems. All rooms have bass problems, but they tend to be less severe the more throw you've got for the bass going back. And we also, of course, did some acoustic treatment with the diffusers in the back here. So since we got rid of, this big giant thing in the control room, the console, again, we're able to really set things up to where they work their best. And so what we've done is design the studio in a way that it can actually be changed and altered depending on the work that we're doing. So the main thing here is mixing. Most of the time I am mixing on Yamaha NS10 monitors. Those are my main mixing speakers. We can do all that work here, work in Pro Tools, and dial in everything. Since the analog gear, most of it is farther in the back, that's not really a big deal for just, tweaking a compressor or some broad EQ. But for your really detailed specialized stuff like the corrective EQ on a vocal, you want to really be able to do that in the sweet spot. So this rack here is mobile, so I can actually pull it over, and the Empirical Labs Little Freak is my favorite EQ for corrective EQ on vocals. We can actually make all those fine adjustments in the sweet spot, and a lot of this is generally used for mastering, but also gets used for 2-bus duties. So I can do my very fine compressor or very fine EQ adjustments for vocals right here, as well as sort of delicate 2-bus work, and I can just pull this right here into the mix position. So I mentioned we do a lot of mixing and also a lot of mastering, and one of the advantages of sending your stuff out to somebody else for mastering is not only do you get maybe some more experienced ears, but you also get your mixes listened to in a different environment, with different sets of speakers, with different room anomalies, all those kinds of things. And so what we thought through and eventually came up with was a really good situation where when we switch over into mastering mode for projects that we mix and master, we set it up as if we're going to a different room. We use different sets of speakers in a different location at a different height. So let me show you how that works. First thing is the mastering position is actually right about back here. And actually when I'm mixing, we actually have this chair down. Tweeters are right at our ear position, right where they should be. When I'm mastering, I'm actually up here. Tweeters are at the ear position right where they should be, but also not only does moving back into the room give us a different listening environment, a different set of phase anomalies in the room, raising and lowering. So when we switch to very different speakers to a very different point in the room, to a slightly different height in the room, it is radically different from the situation where we did the mixing. But obviously, sitting back here, it's kind of tough to work on the audio. Well, this is where these fun plans come in. This is on wheels. So I can actually be making fine adjustments on EQ and compression here, but obviously with the monitor over there, that creates some problems. So the entire mix position moves back here, which is now our monitoring position. We can actually even angle the monitor slightly differently. So for all of my analog processing here, I'm right here in the sweet spot between the speakers. I've got access to all my digital plug-in based things, and again, because the Crane Song Avocet is completely remote, controlling a brain back there, it goes wherever I want. So we really do have this sort of great situation where we can go from a mixing setup to a mastering setup, really getting almost the benefits of working in a completely different space. And again, your rooms are never finished, but we also have spaced the acoustic treatments on the ceiling and on the walls. Hidden behind this pretty stuff is a lot of acoustic treatments. We've laid all this out in a way where it's actually ideal for both mixing position as well as mastering position. So lastly, as I said, we do a lot of production work here, tracking bands, collaborating with different artists, as well as teaching. So one of the other, again, advantages of this modular system here is if we have a bunch of musicians hanging out here in the room or on the other side there in the live area, we can just pull this over, control Pro Tools, and be able to have good eyesight, good interaction with the artists. And as well as for the students, I actually do this on the other side of the room. If I'm teaching a boot camp, I can actually pull the whole Pro Tools control out of the way and let the students come into the sweet spot, you know, and see the big monitor up there to see any adjustments I'm making. So really, the setup, again, as much as had to emotionally go through the problems of ditching the console, the net result of this has been really good. And so far, once we've worked out just a few of the bugs, has sort of been working as well as we could have ever hoped. It's sort of, we're getting great work done. Our clients are really enjoying it. And across the board, it's been very, very cool. So that's the new room. That's the layout. And feel free to hit us up if you have any more questions about it. And we'll see if we can answer them for you.